Today I'm going to be discussing how I uncooked my attention span. I'm going to start off by defining what I mean by that, then go over why this happens to you and why willpower is often not a very good solution, then discuss how you can start fixing it, and finally, how long you could expect this to take. Before that though, I'd like to clarify who this video is for. I think you'll find this applicable if you can't focus on anything for more than a couple minutes for whatever reason. You're always distracted, you're reaching for your phone, another tab on your computer, whatever that may be, it means that your attention span is cooked, which is exactly how I used to be. Totally fried all day. I would always scroll and play video games for hours every day. Now, a couple years later, I've managed to fix this problem and I can consistently sit down for multiple hours at a time and do focused work and not check my phone or anything else during that entire time. I think that's helped me immensely in life. In this video, I want to explain what I did to fix this problem for myself and then what you could do to help yourself. It was not discipline, it was not sheer willpower. Those things never worked very well for me. I did not discover any magical productivity methods. It was essentially realizing that my attention span had been trained and adapted to be very, very low, and that I could reverse that and adapt my brain to make it much higher and much better. What do I mean though by cooked? Before I fixed this problem, I couldn't focus on anything for a very long period of time at all. I want to describe how bad it got and see if you could recognize yourself a little bit in what I'm about to say. The peak of my internet addiction was during high school, so the main thing I had to do during that time was my homework, which I could not lock in on at all. However, that was not the only area of my life that this problem was affecting. It went much further than that. It would be to the point where I'd be having a meal and I'd put on a YouTube video essay, 20-30 minutes, and I would even get bored watching that, which those videos tend to be quite well made and entertaining, but I couldn't even sit through one of those without opening the comment section or opening my phone just to find something new and some variety to do. Even though it was animated and quite a well-made video, I couldn't watch anything longer than 10 minutes or so without needing something else to do. Forget about watching a movie without looking at my phone for 2.5 hours. That was out of the question. I couldn't even watch a YouTube properly anymore. That's how far gone my attention span was. And then again, because I was in school, there was the classic laptop version, and I would open that and I would have an assignment to work on. I knew exactly what I had to do. Within a few minutes though, I would find an excuse to check some other social media just for a minute, and I would start looking up other stuff. I would have an intrusive thought, look up something else, go to Instagram just for a minute, and I would alternate back and forth between that and doing my homework, unable to really focus on either one, which is not a very good recipe for doing good work. And then it would be an hour later, or even a whole night later, and I would be scrolling down some YouTube rabbit hole, for example. I would pick up my phone for no reason other than habit, just have to check my messages, my snaps, whatever it may be. And I continued to do this even though I knew that this was bad for me, this was bad for my focus, and this caused me to do lower quality of work, caused me to take longer to finish my homework. I knew all of that subconsciously in my brain, but I still continued to do this anyway because of how addicted I was. And if this sounds like you at all, this should tell you that this is not a knowledge problem. I wasn't confused about what I should be doing. I knew, in fact, exactly what I had to do. It wasn't super complicated, which means all the advice out there in the world about just be more disciplined, just sheer willpower, was never going to work for me during that stage because I knew what I had to do, but I was so addicted that no level of discipline would have solved this problem for me. Whenever I tried to sit and do something just for 30 minutes, just a single assignment, for example, without any phone or any distractions or anything like that, I couldn't even get close. Maybe 5 minutes, at the most 10 would pass before I got distracted and wanted to go look up something else, and my mind started wandering. I was so mentally restless and constantly searching for something else to do, even though there was nothing else that I was supposed to be doing in the first place. At a certain point, I realized that I was almost an adult. This is ridiculous to be so unfocused, and I should go and fix this. And that is when I started to begin to change and research how to change this for me. And I want to now talk about why this happens to you, and if you've experienced this. This is a pretty simple concept, I think, to explain what's actually happening to you. And that is your brain adapts to whatever level of stimulation you feed it. When you spend all day scrolling and switching apps and switching tabs and playing fast-paced video games, your brain gets used to constant novelty and to instant, very visual rewards. There's a whole concept around dopamine-driven rewards, which is very scientific and very technical, but the simple version is what I'm going to explain, and that's what I think matters here and is relevant for you, which is over all the weeks and months and years of scrolling, your brain learns to expect something new and more interesting every couple minutes. It's not consciously choosing to, it's just the brain adapting to your habit, the same way that it adapts to anything else that anyone does repeatedly. If your brain has adapted to experiencing such new and interesting things on a regular basis, such as every couple of minutes or even every couple of seconds, of course it will not immediately adapt back the other way when you need to do more focused work for a couple hours at a time without looking at anything else. After a couple minutes of your assignment, for example, or of your work that you're doing, your brain starts wondering when the novelty is going to appear again, because normally on your hours of scrolling or fast-paced activities each day, normally after a few minutes, something new already has appeared. So naturally, your brain will experience these feelings of restlessness and boredom that is what you currently experience when you're trying to work. Depending on what you consume, this will be more or less of a problem. This boredom will pop up more and more often, or potentially more and more quickly. For example, Insta Reels or TikTok, for example, anything that is that incredibly fast, short form content will show something new every few seconds, making that one of the worst things that you could be consuming in terms of impacting your attention span, which it does quite negatively. It's not that you don't want to focus. I'm sure that you do, and I'm sure that you wouldn't have clicked on this video if you didn't think there was a problem or didn't have a desire to increase your focus. It's the fact that your brain has been trained to push you away from anything that is very monotonous or very slow. So when you sit down to do something that requires that kind of slow or monotonous work or sustained effort in any way, your own brain starts working against you. That's why you check your phone without even consciously meaning to. It's more of a habit, or switch tabs and barely even realize it. You're not necessarily failing to focus, you're being pulled off of your focus by a habit that you spent years installing in yourself. Your own brain will literally start working against you and your best interest, even when you know what work you have to do and you know what the priority should be. If your brain is so addicted, it will restrict you from doing this work that you have to do unconsciously. And then I want to talk about why willpower did not work for me. And when I was at this stage of my life a couple of years ago, I never had or watched any of these videos that I'm making now. I didn't really know what to look for, and I did not know certainly any of what I've just been describing to you. So I did what everybody else did at the time, which is I assumed that I just needed more discipline or more willpower, or that I was lacking in those things somehow. And I would sit there and I would just say, lock in Charlie, and I would just force myself to complete the assignment just through sheer effort, not on a consistent basis. And that would only work, again, for about 10 minutes before I would go and get distracted and fall back into the same habits, because, again, I had still conditioned my brain to expect novelty all the time, and no amount of saying more discipline or more locking in was going to overcome the fundamental issue in my brain. And something as boring or as monotonous, for example, as a school assignment or as most corporate work, for example, will never be able to compare to social media or fast form content in terms of its novelty or its entertainment. This would be true even if you only scrolled occasionally once a week, but certainly in my case, and I'm assuming for you, it's not very occasional. It's actually every day, which makes this problem even worse. I was trying to override years of accumulated habits of such fast-paced, such constant switching every single day, built into my brain that had fully adapted to this constant stimulation, and I was trying to overcome all of that using nothing but willpower during that moment, which was not a very good recipe for sustained focus and is never going to be a good solution in the long term. Willpower is more of a burst. Each person only has a limited amount of it each day, and you can procrastinate and you can lock in eventually for a single session when you have that 11:59 p.m. assignment and you realize it's 10 p.m. and you better lock in or else your grade's in trouble. Then yeah, I know many of you maybe have procrastinated and have experienced that But you can't do this indefinitely, and that's not a recipe to be focused for many hours each day. That's a very temporary fear of punishment, which is its own form of motivation. That's not sustainable on a daily basis. To fix this, I actually had to change the underlying thing, not just power through it and muscle through it every single time. So that's what I did, and this came down to 4 changes that worked together. I didn't really have this articulated so coherently at the time, but in hindsight, I broke it down into 4 different things that I'm going to explain to you. The first one being, reduce the amount of stimulation that you are consuming. And the reason this is first is because none of the other ones work without it. They all build on top of this one. You have to cut down the total amount of stimulation that you're getting every day by as big a percentage as possible. For me, that meant deleting social media off of my phone to kill the constant scrolling and cutting way back on video games, and eventually getting to the point where I could uninstall them without being so addicted that I would just go and re-download them the next day. And before I go any further, I want to be very upfront about my time frame on this. This was not an instant thing at all. I wish I could say I just one day quit and never went back and had my focus, but that is not true at all. This is very gradual for me. To fully get to the point where I am now and I could do work for hours at a time uninterrupted, this actually took me months. Now, I think that you could solve a lot of these issues within weeks, but for me, this took months to fully cut down to the level that I was satisfied with. The brain does not adapt instantly, as you can imagine, to such a big change in lifestyle. So this will fundamentally be a bit of a gradual thing. And when I started reading and doing some research on this stuff, it became pretty apparent to me that as long as I kept flooding my brain with such high amounts of stimulation all day, my attention span was never going to improve to the level that I wanted it to be and that I actually needed it to be to do my work and my school. Every hour that you spend scrolling is an hour that you're making your brain expect novelty and many different things faster and faster. You can't train yourself, for example, to focus in the evening while you're spending all your mornings teaching your brain to do the exact opposite and expect a new thing every 10 seconds. You would be undoing the work faster than you can do it. So that's why step 1 is to stop overwhelming your brain all day and to cut down on the level of stimulation. Everything else builds on that, which leads me into step 2, not as important as the first one, but certainly something that helped me out a lot, which is to stop switching all the time. And what I mean by that is that I stopped constantly switching what task or what activity I was doing. For example, on my laptop, I would always have 10 tabs open because I would have a YouTube video I was watching or some book or website bookmarked, and then also in the gaps between my homework assignments, I would go check my phone too. It was so many activities I was doing, and then I would wonder why I didn't have any ability to focus. There is actually research on this. I've heard it called task switching. I've also heard it called attention residue. It's been shown to hurt your ability to focus when you're switching back and forth on so many things. Every time that you do that, your brain has to reorient itself to the new thing. And that reorienting process is not an instant thing. It takes some time to fully forget, in a sense, the last thing that you were doing and fully switch your focus onto the new thing. That is not an instant process. So that led me to create a rule for myself, which is very simple. And that is that if I sit down to do something, I either have to do it until it's finished or until a set amount of time passes. For example, either the entire assignment or a 60-minute or a 90-minute period, I would just have to sit there and not move and not look at anything else for that allotted time. Now, again, in the beginning, I couldn't always stick to this because, like I said, this did take me a while, but that is certainly the goal that you should have, and that's something that I'm now able to succeed on. And even when I felt the urge to switch anything that I was looking at, like the tabs or the apps or anything like that, even when I wanted to open something new, I would just stay where I was for as long as I possibly could. That's the entire rule. There's no magical system. There's no app that I used, just a rule that I said in my brain, okay, you don't leave until you said you would, and I just had to stick to my word in that regard. Number 3 is to train attention span like it's a muscle. And for those of you who are gym goers, I think this is going to make a lot of sense. I started training my attention span, and a great metaphor for this, and something that you also hear when you're building muscle, is progressive overload. In a gym context, that means that every single week you want to be adding slightly more weight or reps, and that is how you grow and build muscle. And your attention span actually behaves almost exactly in the same way. It's basically a muscle, and like a muscle, if it is weak or if it's undeveloped, you can't expect to sit down and instantly just focus for 3 hours. That would be like walking into a gym for the first time and trying to put 315 on the bar. Nobody would do that. Nobody would expect you to do that. So why should it be any different with your attention span? To begin, I started out with just 10 minutes of focus and then gradually, progressively overloaded to 15, 20, and then 30 before I even got to 60. And I know that that sounds like nothing, and to be true, it's actually not very much in the long run, but that's the whole point. You just start with 10 pounds on the bar and you add to it. You don't start exactly at your goal weight, you start at whatever you can currently do, and over the weeks and months, you build up to that. In the gym, it's the actual physical weight and the resistance that is the training. The weight being heavy is not a sign that something's wrong at all. That's the entire point. That's the thing that makes you grow. And in this case, the metaphorical resistance is the restlessness and the boredom that you feel 10 minutes into working or studying. The one that is constantly saying in your head, this is boring, let's do literally anything else. That urge is the resistance. Every time that you feel that and that you still sit there regardless and you do not act on it, that is like doing a rep. You're not failing when you feel the urge. Everybody feels that when, again, their brain is so conditioned to feel that way. You're only failing if you actually obey that urge, which you don't have to do. You can feel the pull and feel the emotion, and you could stay in your seat anyway. That's the beauty of this process. You don't necessarily have to act on your every intrusive thought. That is the motion that rebuilds the muscle and rebuilds and trains the attention span. That is the entire workout. And the first few weeks of this are easily the hardest part. I would be sitting there bored out of my mind and getting very distracted and still having my brain all over the place, and I would be wanting to do anything else. And when you first start to fix your attention span, it actually feels worse than before you started, because you sit down and your brain is going, oh, this is boring, let's go do something else. And you constantly feel that urge. But that feeling though is not a sign that it's not working. That is your brain adjusting to the new slower pace, which comes with a higher attention span, and the slower pace, which comes with doing very focused work. And that is like feeling sore after your first workout. It means the process is working, and you need to interpret it that way instead of interpreting it as a bad thing. And then you'll get through the part where everybody else gives up and goes back to old habits and metaphorically relapses a week later and just keeps scrolling and doesn't end up fixing their attention span. And finally, number 4 is stop trying to eliminate boredom. I think boredom in our entertainment economy tends to be pretty vilified, and you can always buy something else or find something else to do. But when I stopped trying to eliminate boredom and stopped seeing it as such a bad thing, it actually accelerated the process of me fixing my attention span. Back when I was addicted to the internet, anytime I was even slightly bored, I would go on my phone immediately. Because why would I not? I didn't know any better at the time. There was zero reason to feel bored, I assumed. It's not like I was a kid anymore with no phone having to stare out the window and be bored. Oh, I didn't really have a reason, so I just went on my phone all the time. Now though, I actually acknowledge the boredom, and I do let it sit there for a couple minutes, and I try and let myself occasionally be bored, as weird as that sounds, because I realize it's actually not a bad thing. It is just an uncomfortable thing, and it's mainly uncomfortable because you're not used to it anymore, because the phone fills the gap so well. And I don't think that boredom is the opposite of focus. I think boredom is actually what leads to focus. Every deep thought that you've ever had, or good idea you've had, and every time you've got very absorbed and very focused on something, came after a stretch of unstimulated time in which your mind actually had time to be bored. That empty and that uncomfortable gap between having things to do right before you get to work, I don't think that's a problem that you have to solve, and I don't think that's something that you should be trying to eliminate. I think that if you never allow yourself to be bored, that you will always fill in that gap with the most available and the most easy and accessible solution, which of course is the phone, because it's so easily accessible. Within a matter of seconds of reaching for your phone, you can go on the internet and solve your boredom. So let yourself be bored occasionally, whether that's waiting in the grocery store line or when you're sitting in your car, or any gap between stuff that you have to do. You don't have to fill that. Embrace that discomfort, and that was another way to rebuild your tolerance, which will rebuild your attention. And finally, how long does this take? I think you'll notice the difference in a couple weeks, provided that you are consistent about this and consistently trying to build on these 4 steps and progressing and gradually cutting down on the amount that you're consuming. You have to do the 4 steps to improve your attention span. You do have to stick to them. There's no app or special hack, and there's also not a video, even this one, even though I make a lot of videos about curing your digital addiction. None of those videos actually do the work for you. I cannot go to your house and make you sit in your chair and feel the boredom and stay focused despite that. That is all on you, and you have to do that actual action no matter how much knowledge you have. So it's definitely worth solving this attention problem, I think, in the long run. The ability to work and to focus without being distracted, I think, is one that many of us young people lack. I think it's something very critical, and having finally been able to develop it, I think it has personally helped me a lot. And after sticking with this process and these 4 steps that I've described, things did finally begin to change for me. I could sit down and I could work without checking my phone every couple minutes. I could watch finally longer content without opening the stupid comment section and getting distracted. And for once, I could focus on one single thing at a time in my life. And it wasn't because I suddenly became a hyper-disciplined person. I didn't increase my willpower or anything like that. It's because I fixed the root cause, and my brain was not in that cooked state any longer, where I would constantly every few minutes be expecting the next stimulating thing and the next hit. I don't think your attention span is actually broken. I think it is just untrained, or has been trained against you, in fact, by the habits that you have been cultivating for the last few years, and everything and all of the constant content that you've been feeding it. So the fix, once again, is to cut the stimulation, stop switching everything, start progressively overloading, start for 10 minutes and go as long as you can manage to, and finally let yourself occasionally be bored. None of that requires you to become a fundamentally different person. It just requires you to change your habits a little bit, to stop teaching your brain to expect something new every 8 seconds and to start teaching it something else instead. Thank you for watching. Subscribe for more similar content about how to get your attention back. Goodbye.